Good afternoon, everyone. We will now be beginning with the final panel of the Capital for Impact track of the day. Final, but definitely not, the best. So, I hope you all are rejuvenated with your coffees. And this particular panel is going to be a roundtable which is focused on corporate social responsibility. The discussion will explore the role of CSR, how the role of CSR capital can be further strengthened in India's impact investing ecosystem through, for example, the structuring of innovative financing models such as redundant grants. The panel will be moderated by Upasana, partner at Trilegal, one of India's leading law firms, and the other panelists for this session include Ms. Aakanksha Gulati, Director of ACT Grants, a non-profit venture philanthropy platform, Ms. Akanksha Sharma, Global Head ESG at Sterlite Technologies, an Indian multinational technology company, Mr. Nirupam Srivastava, Vice President Strategy and AI at Hero Enterprise, one of India's most successful corporations, Mr. Sanjeeva Singh, Executive Vice President, Skill Development Financing, CSR and Entrepreneurship Development at the National Skill Development Corporation of India of the Government of India, Ms. Nidhi Bhasin, CEO of NASSCOM Foundation, the social impact arm of the tech-focused NASSCOM ecosystem. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today, and I would now like to hand it over to Upasana to begin the discussions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. To set the context, data suggests that India's need for funds to further its sustainable development goals is more than $2 trillion. And the government, the Niti Aayog, recently also noted that the framework for CSR and CSR spending obligations is placed in a larger context, the context of responsible business conduct by companies, and it's aimed at increasing the engagement of the private sector in furthering the country's SDGs. So this is the context of our discussion today on how we can leverage CSR capital in furthering the impact goals of the country. We already introduced the panelists here. I'm very happy we have a very eminent panel here. Let me start straight with my first question to maybe Nirupam. Nirupam, given this context of corporate responsibility, are corporate boardrooms now thinking of CSR in a different light? Are they looking at it beyond a mandatory compliance requirement? And do they realize the potential, the opportunity that they have in creating a greater impact?
Sure, thank you, Upasana. And I think while a lot of us see CSR as a mandate from the government to do something, I think most of the corporates in India have been doing it, whether it's Birlas or Tatas or even the later stages like Heroes and other companies. We have always been taking CSR, even without a mandate, to be the core part of what we do. For example, when we set up our plants, we set up schools and colleges for our workforce there, children of our workforce. Then wherever we are setting up, similarly, the hospitals and the healthcare facilities. So these things go hand in hand because when you look at business, you need the complete social infrastructure. You cannot have hundreds and thousands of people working and they do not have social infrastructure. So, and to attract the talent also, but also from a social standpoint, if the workers' mind, the people and the managers' mind is focused on the work and not on what's happening to their kids at home or what's happening to their families' health. So all these things have a cumulative role to play, business and society working together. So from our perspective, we have been investing into education, healthcare since day one. And to add on to the fact, what CSR has done is actually bring in a lot of structure to it. So they have brought in a lot of guardrails, what you can do, what you cannot do, which is in some sense good for corporate governance, because earlier it becomes very much, you can say, personality driven or board driven some places where, they are philanthropic, then they will do a lot more. If they are not, they will do less. So that has gone out of the window. That discussion is gone. So everybody has to put in 2%, and that's very clear. And what I have seen is this is booming not just from the giver perspective, but from the taker perspective, the ecosystem. So a lot of implementing agencies which would, thoroughly depend on funds from the corporates. Today there is active marketplace between the givers and the receivers, and the givers are also evaluating it. So I don't want to go long into it, but what I'm trying to say is that CSR has been part of the Indian industry, Indian ethos, even pre-independence days. So I don't think that is changing, but what has happened is structure has come into it.
That's absolutely right, and it's also anchored in the regulations. So my question to Akanksha, from a corporate perspective, now you would know that the rules themselves now expect corporates to undertake impact assessments, right, through implementation agencies. So there is an expectation not just to spend, but also to measure the impact. So how are corporates strategizing this to ensure that they stay invested with the project and see through the impact creation?
See, when we talk about impact, particularly from the CSR perspective, I think it's really important to understand how the ecosystem has evolved pre-roots and post-roots. So I think post-roots, the entire landscape has emerged to a stage where pretty much it has become a highly impact-driven sector. So today you have definite KPIs, and even there is a very high level of governance and impact indicators set for each corporate with very publicly disclosed goals. So I think this entire narrative of becoming more answerable, accountable, and transparent has given a complete new sort of nuance to this CSR sector, which brings in the perspective of measuring what we are doing and also sustaining what we are doing in a way so that a more replicable and scalable impact could be created. So just to answer your question in specifics, that how does a corporate decide to remain engaged into a program is actually and ideally should be decided at the onset of it, that when you invest into a particular initiative, does that make the program a sustainable investment or not? And if it is not, then what are the exit methods to get out of it or hand it over to the community or to the public sector? I personally feel that CSR investment should be considered as a catalyst to bring in more innovation into the community space, more newer instruments of blended finance or other models which couldn't be tested by the public enterprises, and then hand it over to the government or the community and then move to another. So that's what I feel.
And I'd like to move to Akanksha, Gulati. Akanksha, what is the scope for collaboration between corporates with NGOs, with government, to create larger pooling structures and platforms, so that Akanksha just mentioned scalability. So how can collaboration help create these scalable platforms and collectives where larger impact can be aimed at?
Yeah, so the short answer is, should that be happening? Can they do it? Yes. In reality, it's tough. So I'll quickly share a bit of context, especially about what we've seen at ACT and how that plays into some of what you're saying. So ACT was basically born when COVID hit. And a bunch of people were obviously looking to help, to figure out how to either give back or contribute to, this almost once in a lifetime crisis that we had all been hit by. But few people knew exactly how to do it. So, we consider ourselves really lucky. We came at a time where people were looking for that platform. And we did some things right. We created a lot of transparency. We moved in a very data-oriented manner. We mapped out what were the hotspots, what were the needs, and we deployed capital in, again, a very outcomes-linked fashion. So we checked some of the boxes that, you all have mentioned. But I think one key enabler which we're realizing now, right, was that there was a very clear North Star, which was COVID. Everyone was aligned that we're coming together for a common purpose, a common enemy, and usually in wartime, that sense, that galvanizing North Star exists, right? It's either a disaster, it was COVID in this case, but in peacetime, what usually happens is many of us could care about education, but we care about similar but not the same things in education, right? So that galvanizing North Star doesn't exist. And I think that's where collectives and even impact bonds can play a key role, right? Can we create transparency, trust, strong outcomes, linked funding, impact measurement, all of that, but can we also create these North Stars? So one of the key questions I often ask is, we all want to collaborate, but collaboration is one of the toughest things to do. We all know this, right? So in order to make that a little bit easier, can we start zooming out a little bit, right? Can we say, look, this is what is personal to us when it comes to impact? And that should be 20-30% of what all of us do, right? Because without that, some things will never get funding. So I think it is important to have that personal theory of change and say, at a hero, we know exactly what our stakeholders deal with, and so we're going to go ahead and put some money there. But as a sector, can we start asking, within education, are there 10 things that we all need to galvanize around? It could be foundation literacy and numeracy, it could be out of school children. I think with SDGs and NEP, we have enough raw material now to pick those 8 to 10 causes that all of us can really galvanize around, which really we consider as one of the big success factors that existed, for us at least, as ACT during COVID. And so, in between waves 1 and 2, literally in a span of 1 year, we were able to galvanize significant capital. We're talking, 700-800 crores. And across a variety of funders, from philanthropic capital, HNIs, individuals, as well as CSR. So I think yes, but I think it'll need us to kind of find those, COVID-like, wartime-like key outcomes to galvanize around as a sector and as a community.
And Sanjeeva, too. What is the public sector perspective on this? So how do you think CSR can be channeled towards the development programs of the public sector?
Yeah, good. So CSR in India, I think a notification of these guidelines of CSR, more than 1 trillion Indian rupees has been already put by CSR in different developmental goals. And we feel that for getting the required goal, we need more funds. And majority of that fund is for CSR, that is for direct grant mode. That means whatever we are giving, we are getting 1x of income. If we have to get more impact, then we will have to create some kind of blending for these funds. And we have different kinds of instruments for blending. And if you go by the definition of blending by World Bank, so blending is a strategic combination of various funds like philanthropic, developmental, or attracting private sector. And apart from that, when we're creating a blending finance, there should be 3 outcomes. First, there should be addition of further capital. Second, there should be efficiency in system. And third, it should be linked with outcome. So I think for betterment of our society and development, this whatever we are desiring to get, for that, blended finance of CSR is required as on date. That's a requirement of ease of time.
Thank you. I'm going to read out some data for you, Nidhi, for your response. So data suggests that majority of CSR expenditure is in the areas of education, healthcare, and rural development. And I'm reading data from FY 2021. All right, and it also suggests that 3,200 crores of CSR money was simply contributed to the central government funds. Right? What are the ways you think that CSR, firstly, do you think that there are areas that are being deprived of CSR funds? And what are the ways you think that we can diversify CSR activities?
Thanks. So for your data, I'll refer to my notes and read some data further. But just give me a second. So, we're definitely talking about, there is, if you look at the overall data, maximum money has gone into education and health and rural development. So, but if you really understand it, it is aligned to the need of the country. You look at the size of the population, 1.4 billion, and the whole topography and the geography of the country. Also, last 2 years showed us what is the healthcare system like in our country. So, if it is that if this money is being spent in alignment to the government, my first question would be: is there something wrong with that, right? No, I don't think so, because I do believe you're all talking about collaboration. I do believe in a public-private partnership. So it's very important that if you want to have impact at scale, you need to align yourself with government. Secondly, I think while we are quoting the data, it's very also important because data is all about how you interpret it, right? So we also have to say if I'm almost, I think 7,700 something thousand crores has been used in terms of sustainability. So that means enough money is going on to there. About 4,600 has been spent on your livelihood options. So again, there is a spend happening there. Yes, of course, there is a big chunk happening in terms of the three things, but it's all need based. And also, if we talk about if we need to spend on innovative stuff, any kind of innovation, it again has to be linked to what is the need in the country. We are talking about SDGs. We have a huge finance gap in terms of what we want to achieve by 2030. But to achieve any of that, we have to prioritize the areas that the country needs to invest on. And I do feel that if the CSR or any other money that's going towards all of that, it is aligned, it is linked to the need where the country needs to move on. We are talking about a $1 trillion economy, all of that, but all of that be, sorry, did I say? No. Digital economy. So 1 trillion digital economy, $5 trillion economy, yes. So we are talking about that, but is it possible unless we actually look at making it inclusive by including the last mile? So for that, we have to spend money on rural India, right? So again, so if maximum money is going out there, we can't talk about development only in the urban areas. It has to be rural, it has to be inclusive. Similarly, we are talking about a huge talent gap in the country. Is any of that possible to solve unless we spend money on education, right? And similarly, we know that, what I said, I'm repeating myself, that health, unless we saw the gap in our health infrastructure. So I think if the money is going towards it, it's just that we also need to have some kind of alignment to innovation in these areas. How can, like if you're talking about the openness to blended finance or any kind of impact investing. So it has to be a lot around innovation. Yeah.
So, Akanksha, so in extension to this question, so yes, these are very important sectors and they need our focus. But is there something that government, that state and legislation can do to help corporates identify a more diversified repository of CSR projects or create more investable projects so that yes, there is a focus on certain areas, but there could be other sectors maybe which are getting neglected. Do you feel so, first of all?
So, to answer your question, I think we have to step back and see that, what Nidhi just talked about, that, a couple of sectors just became so lucky to get a lot of resources and others could not. And it is not just a function of, what our global agendas and SDGs suggest, because India stands much behind on the global SDG index, and it is clearly a reflection of that. What I really feel is, it also shows gaps both at the policy front and also at the execution front, because most of the CSR programs, if you look at, it shows you clearly a clear similarity between what most of the corporates are doing in the name of education. Everybody is doing smart classrooms. Most of them are doing, a sort of telemedicine model on healthcare. But how are we trying to create more synergies or collaborate that we all talked about. Could there be more clear policies on, giving a clear direction to corporates to club their resources together? I think this is where we stand today, and which calls for definitely amendments in the rules. Also, in terms of what corporates can do beyond the identified areas, is bring in more innovation, more network, more technology. For example, in our case, we are working on healthcare, education, environment, and gender. And in all of these, we are leveraging technology as much as possible. And this is basically so to create a sort of case study that the programs are much more scalable. This is the role of corporates, I feel.
And Akanksha, would you like to add what NGOs, what the not-for-profit sector can do in bridging these gaps? So or in fact, are they doing that already, working with government in identifying different areas where CSR funding or impact funding as a general can be directed?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the question slightly differently, but I think between the governments, the corporates, and the NGOs that are doing the work, right? I think there's a need for enabler organizations to do some of what we're saying. I think right now what's happening is we're looking for the government to give us the impact metrics, right? Or the NGOs. And we're looking for, what are the commonalities, who will actually make them collaborate. So I think that's where enabling organizations play a key role, right? Can we... And again, I think to me that 70-30 or 80-20, however you look at it, is really important. Within education, health, environment, gender, and some of these really, kind of enduring, important challenge areas for us as a country. Within those, what are 8 to 10, I guess, things that really need to shift. In gender, is it that labor force participation really needs to shift. That is going to be our North Star. And now here's a clear way to measure progress towards that, right? So we need organizations that are helping us create both the North Stars and then hopefully also mechanisms to measure them, right? If it's foundational numeracy and literacy, how is that going to be measured? What's a simple way to do it that all of us can hold ourselves accountable to? So it reduces the burden on, Akanksha and her organization. And frankly, a lot of CSRs are scrambling every time they, introduce a new thing. Now, how do we measure it? Everyone's trying their hand at various different solutions. But I think it also then gives clear North Stars for NGOs who are working towards the cause. There are clearer metrics that we're all, kind of subscribing to. Having said that, while I do agree with Nidhi, if all arrows are pointing in different directions, the impact is fundamentally reduced. So we need arrows to point in, few same directions so that we get a big bang for our buck. But I think leaving room for that 20-30%, right? There will always be causes that perhaps are not getting the time and attention that maybe young people care a lot about, right? Like it could be mental health, it could be LGBTQ. Like there are things that we know we don't want to wake up 10 years from now and say, oh my God, we should have, talked about them then. Air pollution is another one that comes to mind. So how do we still leave room within that larger conversation and the work that enabling organizations do to also, again, leave room for innovation and make sure that we're attacking also a diverse set of causes that over time might become more and more important.
So many of you mentioned innovation, and I'd like to ask my next question to Sanjeev in that context. So what is, according to you, the potential for CSR to be an accelerator for impact finance? We know that NSDC had a skill impact bond. What was your experience in basically catalyzing private capital towards this project? And what do you think is the potential going forward?
Yeah, CSR can do a pivotal role for attracting various funds. And talking about this skill impact board, it's not an accelerator, it's a pay for success kind of instrument. And I was part of that designing of that SIV. So it's in SIV we have 2 risk investors, NSTC and MSTF, and we have 4 outcome funders like SIF, the YCare, HSBC, and GSW. So that's a pay for success, and they have given some milestone. If we able to achieve that, then they are paying that. And NSTC and MSTF, they are investing for time being as a working capital support to various service providers. So that's, we can't say that it's a accelerator, but yes, we feel that CSR can be used as a accelerator. Reason being, for a blended finance, when we do as a simply grant, we are getting only 1x. If we create some kind of a grantee fund or some other kind of facilitator, the impact can be to 5x to 10x. Yes, there is a problem in driving this kind of instrument. Reason being, some rules are not clear as on date. Can we use CSR as a corpus? Not clear. Some law firm has given that yes, we can use as a guarantee fund. Some law firm has given some contrary opinion. That's one problem. Apart from that, when we just go to any private body as a CSR implementing body, the main question is that as on date in India, we don't have any standard framework for monitoring. Apart from that, also we don't have any information repository. NSTC being a big implementer, and we are having more than 300 crore of implementing projects in our land, what we have realized while going through various reports, that same condition is being reported by various projects. There should be one repository for all beneficiaries, and there should be some kind of mechanism that any duplication is being done, it should be flagged out. Apart from that, various capital and donors, they are having some kind of understanding regarding their reporting pattern. If we go to some different company, they are asking in a different way. So we need some kind of repository framework first. Second, monitoring guidelines. There should be some strong guidelines. There should be some minimum information submission to be done. And I think all those three problems that is going to be resolved by social exchange. And for that, Government of India has already put on task to various committees to frame these kind of things. CHT of India has been given a task to create accounting norms that how we can get return for social impact. It should be some, how transaction can be defined. Once it will be done, also Government of India has put some department to create some information repository. So I think any kind of beneficiary, if they are getting impacted, their details along with some hard number or something, maybe it's not clear yet. It should be put in information repository, so the same candidate cannot be used as a duplicate information in the project. These are some challenges. Once we will be able to resolve these problems, I think the private donors, they will be really supporting in this kind of activities, and more fund can trade towards these projects.
Akanksha, you had mentioned you've done a lot of work, behind the scene work on the possibility of using CSR and CSR strategies towards blended finance. So would you like to comment on the possibility?
Sure. So I think I would like to perhaps highlight the gap area, some of which were covered by Sanjeeva already, that the rules today do not give clarity, which restricts the large flow of capital movement in terms of CSR to, because the larger understanding is the CSR can be used as an outcome funder. But then again, on the execution side also, since the sector is largely dependent on grants, many a times NGOs and the implementing agency are not convinced with the paying back of the interest or taking that risk. The other problem is how to find a guarantor or somebody who can cover the risk. And these are the issues where, I think a lot of policy advocacy work has already happened by various agencies. We were also evaluating, there was a huge, very interesting case study, in fact, by the Pune Municipal Corporation. And with the belief that a larger impact could be created by the public sector or the government, but the CSR resources could be used as a big catalyst, not just in terms of executing interesting programs, but also in blended finance options. So they were inviting applications from the private sector as an outcome funder. But again, due to lack of clarity on the rule side, and there was a big movement on writing to the ministry and doing this policy work, advocacy work. But we still lack clarity. And however, on the other side, this could be a big gateway of collaboration that we all just talked about, at how 2 or 3 corporates can create a more scalable model together, where they don't replicate each other's efforts in the name of branding and use some admin cost or this, that, here here and there. But it would become much more transparent as it is today.
And at the same time, not-for-profit organizations can also now access social stock exchanges. So, Akanksha, is that a tradable impact bond issued by not-for-profit organizations? Do you see that as a way to scale up impact investing and also tap CSR funding?
Yeah, so one, I want to caveat, I am no expert at all in impact bonds, but intellectually, I think all of us agree we see a huge amount of value, right? So I think there's heavy, and agreement on the possibility and the potential that it can unlock. My one nudge would be, can we make sure we're talking to social entrepreneurs, NGO founders as well, right? Can they be in the rooms where we're having these discussions? Because to be really honest, today, impact bonds don't have the best reputation when you kind of start talking to that community, right? And for valid reasons. I think there are concerns around, are we going to get really squeezed with the amount of impact linked orientation that there is, right? And all of us have huge empathy also because we work closely with a bunch of these organizations. But because of the lack of clarity that Akanksha mentioned, right? Often there are struggles around what counts as overhead, what doesn't, what counts as ops, what doesn't, right? Because of which they're also being squeezed. A lot of the funding ends up being extremely programmatic, extremely outcomes linked. And so they're not able to build enduring organizations. They're not able to invest in things that would make them very innovative in the long run, right? Whether it's technology, whether it's the team, right? Salaries, we know where they are. Whether it's other things like, media, communications, and other things that go into building really enduring organizations that can scale over time. So I think we just have to be intellectually, yes, I think we all agree, but how do we make sure that in these instruments, we're also being very cognizant that the funding is balanced, that it leaves room, that the interpretations are clear, and it leaves room for, for the organizations to innovate, to accelerate their innovation so that ultimately that they can scale. And even one step before that, my other nudge would be, we also just don't have enough social entrepreneurs and NGOs. So, the other question I'm asking is how do we make this how do we fund in a way that more and more entrepreneurs come to the fold and say, this is a space that I actively want to work in? Today, most entrepreneurs are beginning to take this journey, and because we speak with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, they're almost asking, they're like, should I even do this or not, right? Today, we can name 100 unicorns and startup founders who are doing incredible and, put India on the map. How can we create 100 plus, just incredible social entrepreneurs? But I think, again, my nudge goes back to how do we think of, these instruments in a way that really accelerates innovation, bringing more entrepreneurs to do this work, because ultimately they're the doers, they're the people that we're backing or wanting to back through these instruments. So just how do we have that empathy for the work that they're doing, and how do we really bring them into this conversation as early as possible?
So, Nirupam, so despite the intent, we see that still there are companies, or rather the mandated companies or the companies that are mandated to spend CSR, there are a large percentage of them who are not able to fulfill their mandate. Or they have to, at the end of the year, they have to just donate it according to the schedule, right? So why do you think, what are the hurdles do you think? Are there regulatory hurdles? Are there just a lack of investable projects? Is there lack of innovation? Is there lack of measurement? Or it's a combination of all of this, but what are your comments?
So, Upasana, I think this is a very good question, and it kind of covers everything, we discussed. So we talked about, Akanksha talked about the supporting organization or the middle layer, because between the corporate and the actual NGO working on the ground, there is a significant frequency gap. Because the corporates think one way, and as we said, we have talent issues down the line. So people who are working at the NGO level are not really the corporatized level. So you need translation there. So you need somebody who can support both sides, support the corporate to understand what the NGO needs and NGO to understand what the corporate needs. So there are organizations actually, some of them are there doing quite good work. That's the first part, which is the how to define a project, how to get that project positioned into the corporate side and then get the funding for that and then again report back the impact on that. So that's the first part of it. So there are some consultants, there are some investment banking kind of organizations and some purely market matching. The second part is on the market making side, there's big gap. So a lot of corporates, and this is huge amount of money, I must add, lying untapped. The money is so big, that if any of these people in the room wants to start up your own consulting firm in this area, this is a golden opportunity, By the government standards, the CSR funding which is declared and on the portal, there is around 50,000 crore. Our own estimate, we did the entire market of the BSE, NSE 500, it should be around 80,000 crores. And again, we are not talking about the entire public companies and all that part. So that actually is a very lower conservative number. Of course, we will never reach 100% compliance, but let's assume 80% compliance. So we have a fourfold increase potential for this money to go down to the actual projects and make a change. So we still have huge inefficiency in the entire system. The third point I would like to add is coming to the rules part. I think while having clarity on rules is fine, I think a lot of, and I'm slightly disagreeing here with the panelist, we need to have certain flexibility. Because the problem happens when you create too many rules, you also create too many hurdles. True. So when you get stuck, okay, you can't do this, we can't do that, and then you start to create innovations around to bypass those rules. So some level of flexibility is very, very critical. I understand why rules are required because this sector has been quite notorious for routing the money, and we all know it happens. So it's not like something which we don't know, and that's the unfortunate part. And I think that's where the trust gap lies. So when somebody comes with a project, we at the corporate level start doubting, karega ki nahi karega? Whether it's the money going down the drain or whether it will really make an impact. And again, there's some level of leap of faith, but we need some level of rules, but some level of flexibility. And these are the three areas. First is getting some organization to support this sector, both sides. Second is the capacity building, and the third one is building trust. I think that's most important. And the focus around, you talk about certain sectors and certain not sectors. Frankly speaking, India is such a vast gap area. So even if we put all companies together and say only one sector, healthcare, we still not be able to do it. So good part is the COVID has been a great force to mobilize people, because if you are dead, what will you do with the money? So essentially put it on donation and at least do some good work. But again, as the threat recedes, people start again, this is my money, this is your money, we will not, those kind of things happen. So collaboration becomes a bit of a challenge. Government is doing fabulous work actually. I did not expect that, but we all need to do more.
So before I open it up for questions from the audience, Nidhi, just one remark from you on what do you think, what can be done on capacity building, market building, since you are, working with government quite often and representing corporates to government. What do you think both of them can collaborate for capacity building?
Before I comment on that, I just wanted to, bring up the point that Akanksha had brought about social entrepreneurs, right? I think one of the gaps out there is that, and connected to compliance and why a lot of money is not being spent out there, is that unlike many other countries, in our country, the term social enterprise is not defined. Right? Unless that is defined, there will always be a huge issue between the intention of a corporate or a funder to give money for social entrepreneurship and actually giving it, because everything is around compliance. And I was dying to comment on when you were talking about the negative and the positive and the flexibility. I completely agree with you, because there's a huge benefit of the compliance, because that means that the corporates are spending money and time and not putting it or not making excuses about it. But the second part is it's making life difficult for non-profit organizations and the corporates, because it's taking away the flexibility of innovation. It's taking away the flexibility of looking at impact, because right now, I was talking to one of you earlier, we're using the word impact, but it's all become output. how can I finish my money before 31st of March has become the overall agenda of every corporate and every non-profit organization. So where are we talking about development out here, right? So I think that's a struggle. But yes, in terms of collaboration, I think I completely feel that yes, there is a huge scope for us to collaborate with the government, with the private sector, and around, and it actually can't happen much unless there's more clarity on the compliances. And I'm commenting from a very CSR point of view, because as NASSCOM Foundation, we basically work with the CSR of tech industry. And unless there is more clarity on the compliances and it is not so watertight, I feel that the collaboration may be a very big problem. We all are right now talking about impact investing, we're talking about blended finance. Akanksha, you yourself said that the problem that you're facing out here is that because of the compliances and the non-clarity in this whole thing, nobody's taking the risk, nobody's ready to move forward. And my own conversation with various corporates, they rather take the safe route and rather spend the money on PM relief fund than really take those risks. So yes, I feel end of the day, yes, I stick to the point that if we need to have any kind of impact, we need to have a partnership with government, we need to have collaborations between private public sector, but it has to now come with a little bit more openness and flexibility on how this money can be utilized.
Very well said. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, some tough questions for our very eminent panelists.
Thank you. I'd like to understand, we talk primarily in the non-profit context. I'd like to understand how CSR can be leveraged for-profit enterprises as well, given we have been talking in a lot of panels about the catalytic nature of philanthropic capital. So would love to understand either examples or maybe structural changes that are needed to bring about CSR for-profit enterprises. Thank you.
I think this is one area where we definitely need blended finance and impact financing investing models, because as per the current rules, it is strictly for non-profits, and that is where we all wanted to speak about that. How do rules restrict innovation more and more? And we have seen, there's enough data already that how more innovation is there on the for-profit side, and they are bringing best of the not just the capital but also the technology, which is not being leveraged, or the CSR sector is not able to leverage that part of it. So yes, we must all wait for the things to change.
Yeah, I think it's a dichotomy here right now, and since you can do mixing at a different level. So like NSDC example is there. If you do it at a bank level or at a government level, it's okay. But when you go to the corporate level and the NGO level, it's not okay as of now. So once we see that part, flexibility coming in, probably yes. Otherwise, we still have to go to some level of agency which will do that mixing or blending, as we call it, blended finance, and then only we can do that.
I'll quickly add, because again, feel your pain. I think, look, CSR brings a lot of volume and money, right? And I've often asked the same question, and I think maybe it's wrong to pin everything on CSR as well, right? So, ACT, for example, again, at the risk of kind of, tooting our own horn, but we have the luxury that a lot of high net worth individuals have given us the money, so it tends to be fairly, unrestricted. And so we almost see our place as that we work in complementarity with perhaps CSR, right? We come in early. Frankly, we don't even distinguish between for-profit and not-for-profit, and that's something we take a lot of pride on, that over time we really want to blur those lines, but we want to be the high-risk capital that comes in very early in an entrepreneur's journey to fund things, literally, like the things that I named, tech, oftentimes branding, all the things that maybe you're not able to avail through a typical CSR, and can we help you build either your business case or your not-for-profit journey, so that over time then you're able to access other funds of capital that exist. So I think perhaps it's also time for different kinds of funders to occupy different places in the journey of an entrepreneur as well.
Any other questions? There's one hand here, I think.
Environmental Defense Fund. Because we are talking about CSR bringing a lot of money. I think it's not just money, it's also a lot of attention that CSR brings in, not just national but global attention to the cause that you're working for. Now, most of the CSR funds are going to health, education, and some for rural development. Now, because I come from an environmental organization, so my question obviously is how is CSR going to diversify to a lot of new areas, which is very, very critical for India's development right now and global commitment. For example, infrastructure requirement for waste management, because renewable energy is something where we already see investment, but where are the investment coming for waste management, because we need to mitigate and add on both in waste management, and the same for resource efficiency, I would say. And I can think a lot, or a lot similar areas, for example, carbon market or emission trading, where exactly CSR is going and how open are they, to tie up with civil society or private sector organizations. Thank you.
I think we did touch upon that. We can, Nidhi will.
I think maybe also Akanksha is maybe the right person to answer further on that. So since you spoke about environment, I think there are two angles out here. One, we cannot ignore the fact that the amount of money that is getting spent on sustainability is growing. So, we don't need to compare it to in proportion to what's happening in education. But we need to more of acknowledge and appreciate the fact that there's a lot of investment which is increasing out there. We are talking about a country talking about net zero. So people have started aligning it to it, but it takes time because the country is still we are still dealing with poverty. We're still dealing with education. We're still dealing with people who do not have 2 square meals. So it's not that it's not important, but it is just more like right now the country is still dealing with that, and this is happening. The fact that 7,600 something crores was spent on sustainability. It is a huge money to be spent in the last few years, right? And my other thing is the fact that a lot of bigger companies are talking about sustainability along with CSR. You have Aakanksha sitting out here who's moved from CSR to ESG, right? So there is a lot of, movement towards that. Sorry.
Thanks, Nidhi. Just to answer your question, I think there are a couple of layers to it. One is when we talk about sustainability, you have to really understand that how paradoxical are we operating as a country. We are one of the largest coal-based economy perhaps in the world. And we talk about net zero emissions, in the same breath that we talk about, doubling our coal consumption as an economy. So, which is a very big question mark. The other part is that my role also involves taking care of sustainability. So when we, the interesting part here is that how post-COVID, ESG became a movement at the Wall Street, which was also adopted by, with like a wave by many other institutional investors around the globe who started evaluating ESG ratings of corporates before lending on money. So I think with this coming into context, the environmental concerns are majorly seen with a business lens rather than CSR or the relation to CSR, that how responsibly are businesses or industries or countries operating rather than just boiling, because CSR that way at the macro level becomes just a fraction of it. So, I think of what Akanksha or somebody perhaps said that, we need to not necessarily link everything to CSR, but then also figure out options. Another dimension here is not many organizations are coming up or social entrepreneurs are coming up sustainable solutions on climate. Most of them are, for-profit entities or business-driven entities. So I think there's also a gap at the offering side of it, not just on the supply side, but also on the demand side.
So if Nirupam's estimate is correct, we have enough and growing CSR funds to be able to cater to all the newer emerging areas, and they don't need to be to the exclusion of any others. Go ahead, please.
Sure, and just to add, so as rightly mentioned that, see, we, for example, if we talk of environment, we talk of renewable energy. So the policy is essentially to encourage for-profit. So today solar is for-profit industry and it's a big industry. So not everything needs to be put into this not-for-profit basket. If something can be for-profit, and that's what I think the first question that came from. So for-profit is also good. We are not saying for-profit is bad. So for-profit, if you can make money, do that good part, please do it. If you can't do it, then we go for not-for-profits. Otherwise, for-profit is good. And I think I was part of the renewable energy policy development in India. I was with Schneider Electric at that time. We completely say government will give the electricity rate that will make the entire industry sustainable. So why we should not do that? Why should make the rate low and make it not for profit? No, I mean, make it them money, give a good rate from electricity perspective, make them money and everything works out fine, That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your really useful, very particular comments and very, very technical comments. I think it was a very interesting panel discussion. Thank you all for attending, and you can find any of the panelists and myself during the conference. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions that you may have or thoughts that you want to discuss. Thanks again.